Jonathan, who do we have on the Stoke cast today?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
What? What are you talking about, man?
I'm going to start by asking you a question.
Oh, gosh.
Welcome to the Stoke cast, where each week we bring you an inspiring athlete, adventurer, or entrepreneur and dig into their stories and strategies for balancing work, life, and adventure while having fun and making a difference. I'm Jonathan Ronzio.
And I'm Emily Holland. Thanks for joining us today.
Let's get to it.
Emily, have you ever wanted to climb any gigantic mountains?
Define gigantic.
I mean, I know
relative.
you're climbing all the 14 or not the 14ers, the 4,000 footers around New Hampshire, New York, Vermont, right?
Sure. Trying someday.
You're on the way.
Yeah, I'm almost done with New Hampshire, but those aren't gigantic. That's
So most of those are like solid hikes.
Yeah.
But have you ever thought about any like high altitude, any legit mountaineering?
Oh, no, not for me.
How come?
I don't like being cold, so that's one thing. So that's one. And it's just not the challenge that I see myself doing. I just am not, like, geared towards it. I don't know.
So you went out to Mount Rainier, and
I didn't do it. Way to call me out.
But you were hiking around, like, the bottom, Mirror Paradise, and you didn't feel called to, like, get on top of that mountain?
Not even remotely. And, I actually, full transparency, really struggled with that when I was going out there, because I went out there with my boyfriend, and he and his friends were doing Mount Rainier. And at first I was like, oh, well, he's probably not going to want to date me if I don't want to climb Mount Rainier anymore. So I got, like, really into it, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to definitely do it. And then I thought to myself, and I reflected on it, and I was like, I have no desire to do that. It just doesn't speak to me at all, and I'd much rather, like, spend my time there running around and do some trail runs, do some hikes, and see some stuff.
I mean...
I like it. But you're the opposite, man.
Great.
I get it,
Well, in a way, I envy that. It's
much less expensive too.
It's definitely less expensive, and you have less really long trips.
Yeah,
but
can condense it down.
I definitely, for whatever reason, there is just something in me that sees those big mountains like Rainier or Denali or whatever, and I look at it and I'm like, man, I have to be up there. I have to challenge myself to like see if I can do that, if I can take on that level of adventure and be competent to that extreme in the mountains. Speaking of being competent to that extreme.
Now we're getting
to who we have on the show today, right?
Gosh.
You see how that flows.
Yeah.
So we are talking to Adrian Ballinger, who is a big mountain skier and climber. And when we say big mountain, we're talking the biggest. This guy, you may have heard about his project Everest No Filter, where he was just Snapchatting the whole time, all the way to the top of Everest. And also, I think he has like 8 Everest summits without oxygen.
No, 8 total, 1 without. That's what I think.
Oh, that's right.
Yes,
that's what it is. 8 Everest summits, 1 without supplemental oxygen. But still, just outrageous.
And not even just that stuff. He also owns a full guiding company that he's had for almost 15 years now.
Right? Yeah. So
he's employs all these people, started with just him, builds this whole business. He was so rad to talk to.
That was my favorite part of this conversation. Yeah. I mean, like we're talking very much about like the mountain side of things right now and talking up his adventure athletics and his accomplishments in that arena. But yeah, I think the coolest part of this conversation is how much he talks about how he actually found more happiness or more balance in his life when he kind of dialed back from being in the mountains all the time and really put more focus into his business and kind of embraced the duality of being in one place and then the other and putting equal focus into business and the mountain pursuits. And so, talking about his business, which he's the founder of Alpenglow Expeditions, worldwide company, leading clients all around big mountains like Choayu and Everest and Cotopaxi and And just so talking to him about growing that business and scaling it beyond himself as just the main guide, but bringing on a team and the logistics and the operations, really cool, balanced, inspirational, actionable conversation is probably why I like it the most.
Yeah, I think you said it best. And I think just besides that, he's pretty innovative in the way that he goes about these trips, and then the way that he's built his business and added other, I guess, revenue streams into that. So stay tuned for our conversation with Adrian.
Okay, we have Adrian Ballinger on the Stoke cast today. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm great. It's good to talk with you guys.
Yeah, we're psyched to have you here. What's going on out in Squaw Valley?
Not too much. Kind of enjoying in many ways, the best time of the year. It's just beautiful and sunny every day here. Nights are below freezing. Days are in the 60s. And so been doing lots of rock climbing. Emily, my girlfriend, just left town for 2 months. But before that, we were trying to get as many Sierra adventures in as we could. And now I'm, believe it or not, almost chained to a desk at Alpenglow Expeditions, getting ready for a big grand opening this weekend.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, hey, it's refreshing to hear that even you are chained to a desk sometimes, right?
I should not be asking for sympathy from anyone, though. My balance, I'm pretty lucky, but yeah, right now it is sort of like go time. Actually, sort of an interesting thing is this is normally at this time of year in September and October, I would be in the Himalaya leading a big 8,000 meter peak like Cho Oyu or Manaslu or something like that. And this fall is kind of my first fall in 20 years that I'm not over there. So I have a great team of guides over there leading our autumn Himalaya trips, and I really am in the office, and it's a pretty unique change for me. I'm learning a lot being on this side of the satellite phone calls.
Yeah. Are you feeling the itch a little bit, though? Like, hey, maybe I should be there.
I totally feel the itch, yes. And I also just feel like it's interesting to feel what it's like at home, where you're getting these little updates of what's happening on the mountain. And you totally trust the people there. My members of my groups are great. My guides are amazing. The Sherpa team is so good. But still, you're only getting a tiny bit of the information here. And it's actually really, it's stressful. And it's hard to just chill out and watch the expedition happen instead of being there hands-on.
For sure. So that's actually a really interesting point. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, you built Alpenglow Expeditions, obviously with yourself there at the steering wheel for much of the past years of your career climbing and since the business has been in existence. And now you're at that point where you've delegated away some of these responsibilities. You've built a team, and now you kind of just have to trust the ship will stay course without you at the helm, right? So, like, what's that process been like of building a team that you can hand things off to?
I mean, the great thing is that when I sit back and take a minute, maybe it's over like a nice calm cup of morning coffee. Like, I remember that the people doing the jobs I used to do are way more talented than I ever was, whether it's at guiding or running the office. And so, as long as I allow myself to step back and remember that, I have this great team and everything's going great. But at the same time, yeah, it's hard. I started Alpenglow Expeditions in 2004 with this very clear goal of like an educational and team-oriented approach to guiding big mountains and, only guiding with small groups. And we've held to those values throughout these years. But for the first 8 or 9 years, I guided every single trip. And then starting in 2012 or 2013, some of my guides who used to assist and guide with me started running trips, but never the 8,000 meter peak stuff. And so this autumn is the first 8,000 meter peak that Alpenglow's ever run without me there. And my guides, Topo and Jaime Avila, are just super talented and they do a great job. They're actually going for the summit tonight, so I won't be sleeping at all tonight. I'll be sort of sitting by the satellite phone looking for updates and watching their GPS coordinates on their spots and things like that. But it is a transition, and I've needed really a lot of help from sort of like mentors who have businesses and have had to go through a similar process. Cody Townsend is a great example I think you've had on the show before, who really stepped back from arcade and had to go through that process. And so having friends who have done that and knowing that it works and with the right team, it makes things better for everyone and for the product. I know that is true with Alpenglow as well. And the reality is I've been guiding and climbing pretty much 8 months a year out of the country, living in a tent for almost 20 years since I graduated college. So it was time. It really was time. I wasn't as happy out there as I had been in the past. And that, you have to listen to those signs. I really think you have to watch for those things because there's risk involved and there's your partner's experience involved, which changes when you're faking it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to keep an authentic self. And I certainly don't do the big mountains that you do, Adrian, but I have found later in my life, or as I go on, I appreciate comfort still going out and challenging myself in whatever mountain landscape I can be in, but I appreciate a bed and not a tent. I'm gonna be honest, I really do. Whether that's building it out in your like van or your car or whatever it is, just slowly inching back to like getting towards a bed, I think is the goal.
It is a great point. I am right there with you. I love my tent time, but I definitely love my bedtime too.
Yeah.
And it's fun to feel that balance. And I think, balance is such an easy word to use, but that is what we're talking about. Like as soon as I started taking a bunch of time off from the mountains, I started being re-energized to do those things again and to be on those trips. So it's not that I've stopped doing it. It's just that I pick and choose a little bit more, and I make sure that I know that every trip I go on, whether it's a personal trip, like, trying to climb an 8,000 meter peak, or whether it's a climbing trip with Emily, or whether it's guiding a trip for Alpenglow, it's like, I know I want to be there. And I'm lucky. I'm just so incredibly lucky, like that I get to have that choice, right? Because a lot of us don't in many different forms of life, but even, I think a lot of people look at mountain guides and it's just like, when you see it from the outside, it's like, oh my gosh, that they have the best life ever. They get to climb, pick the mountain, whether it's Everest or the Grand Teton. They get to climb it every day, all year. And it's like, that sounds really rad until a reality. And then you realize it's a job too. And you have to treat it like a job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, no one can be happy doing the same thing all the time. You need that duality, that push and that pull. I say all the time when I'm away on a mountain or on an adventure, all I can think about is like a burger, a beer, and a bed, and
yes.
And then when I have those things and I'm at home for a good amount of time, like I am just so captivated by nothing more than what's the next adventure, right? But you need both.
Absolutely. You do need both. And it is funny, that process, that's pendulum back and forth. I hope it's just not always a grass is always greener thing. I think it's actually healthy, like to want the other when you're in the one. And then also I try to appreciate wherever I am in those two different places. So when I am home, it's like, wow, I get to spend time with my family and be with this great group of friends. And Alpenglow is really been such a cool project. I felt alone in it for many years, sort of running it, owning it, guiding all the trips. And, but now it really has changed. I actually have, two business partners in the business now. So two people, Logan, my buddy Logan, who's a fully certified guide like I am, has come in and sort of really runs the business, the operations side. And then one of my closest friends, Aaron, who actually started as a client, but later became a sort of climbing partner and skiing partner and investor in the business. And so now three of us work together on the business. And this summer we had 19 guides doing a variety of different types of climbing here in Tahoe and around the world, and 4 full-timers in the office. And so we're a family now, and every day I am home. And not to say there's not great frustrations in the office sometimes, but it's pretty cool to see how we're growing and how we get to Alpenglow gets to support some people and their families and their growth, and also is just getting to offer more experiences in the mountains to more people. And I could never have done that alone.
Well, so you said you started it in 2004, and how many years was it until your first full-time in-office hire, as opposed to just the contractors, the guides, and everything to make the expeditions work alongside you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it started in 2004. In around 2008, my ex, or now ex, started helping me in the office, but really wasn't getting paid for it. She was pretty much donating her time and incredible skills to helping Alpenglow. Our first part-time employee in the office was in 2010, and I think our first full-time in the office was in 2014. And now, like I said, we're 4 plus me, so 5 full-timer. I guess I'm not really a full-timer in the office, but so you can sort of see the growth and how it ramps up. It's been really interesting. Yeah.
Well, what's been obviously we know like the big mountains and the logistics involved in that. I mean, that's a challenge for many, including you, but also not, right? You're comfortable with that. You've been doing it for so long. So in terms of building this company, what's been the biggest like unexpected challenge? When you are now bringing other people into the mountains that don't have the same experience as you or your friends that you would normally go with, and you have the logistics and the insurance and all that kind of stuff. Like what's that challenge been like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny you mentioned logistics. Like I am like a total logistics nerd. I just love it. I plan all of me and Emily's vacations. Like I'm just good at it. And it's not perfect for everyone because I plan like everything down to the minute. And then when I'm on this trip that's meant to be vacation, if I don't hit those exact minutes that are on my schedule, I'm a little psychologically challenged. But so,
well, we should really grab a coffee next time I'm there, Adrian. We're on the same page. Yeah.
Nice. Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, I love it. So if I have like a multi-million-dollar trip to Everest with loads of moving parts and having to move 15,000 pounds of equipment to a base camp and then up the mountain with film equipment and food and all these things, I thrive on that. I love it. The greatest challenge, I think, there's been so many, and it probably like depends on the day. But I think for me, it's been the uncertainty within the business on a daily and yearly basis. It's so interesting. Like I guess we're about to celebrate we're going to have a big 15-year party next summer. So we'll have been around for 15 years. And like, I guess that means like we're kind of established. Like a lot of people talk about the 5-year mark, where if you make it past 5 years, you're probably going to survive. But I still feel such deep uncertainty all the time. So we were actually having this conversation today in the office. It's like, we've been running Everest trips now since 2008. And we run a good trip every year. We've had a lot of success. We've had a lot of failure. And yet, I'm looking at next spring and I'm like, what if no one signs up? What if no one wants to go with us? And there is actually, like, even though I'm very confident we'll have an Everest trip next spring, there is reason for that uncertainty because the market feels so hard to predict. So 1 year I'll guide 9 trips to Ecuador through Alpenglow Expeditions, and it'll be the most popular place we go to. And the next season we struggle to fill 1 trip to Ecuador, while at the same time, a trip, trips in Bolivia that we haven't run for 3 years, suddenly we're full with a waiting list and 3 sections. And I just haven't figured out any predictability to my business. And maybe that's true in all businesses. And so you have to have a lot of confidence that, like, in the cash flow crunches and, when things are tough, that you're going to get through them. And where that weighs on me the most is that I now have a team of 12 Sherpa that I work with every spring and every fall. And I am so scared of having a season where I can't hire them all and they can't support their families or they have to go to another company. And my guides from the United States, certainly, most of their lives are not quite as on the edge as potentially a Sherpa and how badly they need each season's work. But it's still the same thing, watching my guides start to have families and start to own houses and to know how uncertain the work is as a mountain guide, especially in the United States. It's not like living in Chamonix and knowing you'll have 250 days of work a year. Feeling that uncertainty myself and yet needing to stay confident and be a good leader, I find it hard every day.
That also brings me some sort of solace. I hate to say it. It's like, well, okay, even, from the outside in, right, especially with social media, which we've talked about before on the podcast, like, everyone looks at someone like you and they're like, oh, he has figured it out. He lives, the most fantastical life. He's always going to do all these rad things. And, he has a business, right? So, so I think it is helpful to show people that that's not always the case, and it doesn't just magically get easier once you get some level of success, whatever that means for you.
Everybody's human. Everybody struggles.
Yeah.
The challenge continues. We all struggle. Yeah. And you're so right about social media. This might be a quote you've heard, and I don't know if it's his originally, but my climbing partner, Corey Richards, always says that, when you look at social media, you're comparing someone's outside to your insides, basically. So you're looking at what they're choosing to project in that Instagram image or even on Snapchat, but you automatically compare that to all the uncertainty and stuff you feel inside. And it's an impossible comparison, but I think we all very naturally do it. It's,
For sure. It's hard not to. So one note in regards to, I guess, the predictability of where the climbs are going. This is just a hunch, but maybe looking at the most tagged, look at influencers, adventure influencers, and the most tagged spaces on Instagram, and be like, all right, that's where everyone's going to want to go next year.
That's a whole nother conversation.
I'm sure you're right. It's a great call. One thing a correlation we think we've noticed, and again, this just caters to our audience and the clients that seem to come on our trips. Like, we've noticed, if you know the New York Times 52 places to go list.
Oh yeah.
If one of the countries that we operate in is on that 52 list, which Bolivia and Ecuador are both examples have been on the past couple of years, I'm pretty sure we see a good uptick from that. It's interesting that where those influences happen, and we might not even realize they're happening when we're looking at those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we've talked a little bit about the lessons you've learned as you've gone through owning the business and having the business, but where did this all begin? I mean, I don't think someone comes out of, the womb being like, I'm going to climb Everest every year. So where did that all start? Your love of big mountain expeditions and kind of the catalyst for starting Alpenglow?
Yeah, it's been such a wild process. And if I had to pick one thing that set me on this path, it's a series of 3 mentors. So I just can't overstate the importance of if you're lucky enough to find a mentor in something you like, how much they can help. But so specifically, my family moved from England when I was 6 years old, and we moved to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And my family, I grew up just outside of Worcester, walking distance from Mount Wachusett, if you know Wachusett in Central Mass. So I'm with you guys. I know you're in Boston.
Yeah. Used to ski Wachusett every Monday.
Nice. That's rad. I used to ski there every day I could.
Yeah.
So my family wasn't an outdoorsy family, but they did, once we were in New England, they were trying to take us on hikes and things like that. And then I had a family friend who had a son my age. His name's Greg. He's still my best friend. We grew up together. And his dad was a pretty good East Coast rock climber. And he started taking Greg, his son, out, and me. So I started rock climbing when I was 12 years old. By the time I was 15, I was lead climbing. I probably shouldn't have been, but I was. Couldn't afford cams, so I was just using nuts and hexes and things like that, and being as sketchy as I could. And as soon as we got driver's licenses, we started going to Mount Washington in the winter and trying to get ourselves killed up there.
Oh, gosh.
And so I just was learning a lot in that way. And then I ended up going to school in Washington, D.C., to Georgetown. And there was an outdoor education program there. And sort of a well-known East Coast climber named Chris Warner, who owns the Earth Treks climbing gyms, he was overseeing this outdoor program. And I came in with climbing experience and lead experience, and he suggested I started interning for him. And so I started pretty much every school break going on international trips with him. I'd make coffee. I'd do whatever I had to do to get to go on those trips. And then summers, I'd work at his climbing gyms and teach climbing outside. And as soon as I graduated from school, and instead of going back to medical school like I was meant to, I actually got into medical school and was meant to go and deferred for a year. And then at the end of that 1 year deferral, said, there's no way I'm going back, much to my parents' disappointment. So I had this, so I graduated school and started just full-time internationally guiding, and had this great mentor in Chris Warner, who eventually introduced me to Russell Bryce, who's sort of probably the best known 8,000 meter peak guide in the world. And so eventually I started not only working with Chris, but also working with Russell. And so I had these incredible mentors in the mountains, but also saw in their businesses, even though they were great, wonderful, safe businesses that introduced so many people to these things that I love, I also saw things that I wanted to do differently. I wanted to work with smaller groups. I wanted to work with lower ratios so education could be more a part of each trip instead of just dragging someone to a summit. So I had these very specific things that I thought I could do differently and that I aspired to do differently. And so ultimately in 2004, started Alpenglow Expeditions.
So what do you think it is that you have within you that allows you to approach certain challenges with the confidence that you do, whether that's, as a 15-year-old looking at a rock wall and not having the right gear and being like, I think I can get up that anyway, or looking at Everest and being like, I think I could probably do that without oxygen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, I was very lucky to have parents who instilled that sort of confidence, or at least willingness to take a different path. So my family, it might not seem like that out there now, but my parents moved from everyone they knew and their entire family from England to the US. Totally on a whim, because they wanted to try something different. And that's kind of always how they approach their lives. My dad had a real corporate job, and then in the middle of it in the late 80s was like, this sucks, I don't want to do this, and just quit and went to a startup and took these big risks, even though he had a family to support and things like that. And my mom was the same. She came over as a teacher, but wasn't able to get teaching credentials easily in the United States. So she started a daycare center out of our house where, ultimately I grew up. I'd come home from high school and there would be 11, 3 months old to 10-year-olds running around my house. And my mom created this really successful business. And so I think I always had those sort of examples. And even as they were pushing me to get a nice, safe job, like being a doctor, they also found their ways to support me in trying different things. And a great example I had is in this time where I told you I was, out leading rock climbs and was 15 years old and only had nuts and hexes and was starting to climb stuff where, there was some risk involved and things like that. And my mom never wanted to hear about rock climbing. I had to tell her I was going to the library when I went rock climbing, even though she knew exactly what that meant. That was just the game we played. But I started finding on my pillow at home, once a month or once every 6 weeks, Cam, a Black Diamond Camelot, a friend. And over a period of 8 months, she actually built me a rack because someone had told her that I could be much safer and also try different things if I had these things that there was no way I could afford. And so she sort of supported me in that way. But same thing, she never gave me one in my hand. It was always on my pillow when I came home from school. And it was her way of supporting me, even though outwardly she was like, this climbing stuff is stupid and dangerous. So I had that in my life. And, now I think it's led to 20 years later, sort of this belief that if you keep pounding away at something, it's possible. And if you're willing to take a risk, it might not work out the way you think it does, something good is going to happen. There's going to be an adventure there.
Well, that's a hell of a tooth fairy you had, man.
I was just gonna say that. Oh my gosh, you stole my joke. He's always doing that.
Totally. It was pretty remarkable. My mom passed away about 2 years ago from a really aggressive form of cancer, and when she was sick, we had a lot of good time together, and just talking about these old memories and remembering how that was, and being able to talk a little bit more honestly and openly about that sort of stuff and how much it did set me on this path. And then, all the way to now, as she was sick, I was getting ready to go back to Everest on another no oxygen attempt. And that was really hard for her, that as my family was potentially losing her, I was also taking a lot of risk. And,
right.
There were these just awesome conversations, but my mom's head and heart was always in the right place. And she always supported me in these really cool ways.
That's really beautiful, and I think a good lesson for parents, because I think oftentimes they have an idea of what they want their children's life to look like for sure. But and just silently supporting them, I think that there's a lot of confidence to be gained, and you're a testament to that. So speaking of putting yourself in risky situations, so obviously being a guide, you need to have sort of a way to have a level head in the most risky situations. So how do you conquer that with not only yourself being out there and doing these feats as an athlete yourself, but then also with the small groups that you guide as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, overall, I'm just way, way more conservative than maybe most people think a mountain guide or professional climber and skier would be. I back off a lot. That's kind of the easiest answer. I mean, I think, I've seen enough accidents among family and friends. I've had fatalities while I've been guiding. Actually, both fatalities I've had were with other guides or staff versus clients. I've never had a client fatality, but just going through many near misses in my earlier years guiding, and also then having some of these tragedies, I think it's just not worth it, right? And so, or it isn't to me most of the time. So I think, I recognize there's random risk in the mountains and things we can't control. And that's something we talk with our clients about. It's something we as guides talk a lot about. And those are the things you have to accept if you choose this lifestyle. But then there are a lot of risks that we can control and often choose not to, because we think we can get away with it. We think it's going to be okay. Avalanche conditions and snow science and snow safety is probably the easiest example of this. Like, how often this run is just going to be so good, and even though you have red flags or niggling things that are telling you today is not the day, it's so easy to go anyway. And most of the time you're going to get away with it. And so you almost get positively reinforced that maybe you can take on more risk than you should. But I think over a life of doing this, I've just decided to try to be as conservative as I possibly can be, and know that our experiences are pretty powerful, even maybe more powerful even when we fail. I mean, my 2016 year, turning around an hour and a half below the summit on Everest without oxygen, in many ways was a more powerful experience than the next year when I stood on top.
That being the case, and I've experienced some of those moments as well, why is it so hard to turn away from the top? I mean, even when you've made all the right decisions, you've accepted the factors and seen the risks, and it was the right move, why do you so often look back and be like, I should have done it?
Yeah, I mean, human nature, right? Like once we are out of that place of pain or suffering or risk, I think it's really hard not to kind of like look back and be like, oh, maybe I could have pulled it off. Maybe I could have pushed just a little bit harder. Maybe that rock fall wasn't going to happen again. It feels like human nature to reanalyze those things and to wonder if you could have pulled it off. And then I do think, I think we live in a society where we often talk about pushing past our limits and things like that. And there's a lot of truth to those things, but when I think it sometimes gets confused between figuring out how to push past your physical limits, and then taking on uncontrollable risk. They're actually two very different things. Being in a race at home, like an Ironman or an ultra, like you can push past, and when things go wrong, you can DQ and sort of end up in an aid station and get out. And when we're in the big mountains, there is kind of no DQing. There's no disqualifying. There's just dying. And I just look at them really differently, but I think it's easy to kind of carry the same mentality into both. And I've been guilty of it plenty of times.
Would you say you've failed more than you've succeeded, or turned back more than you've summited?
Easily, yes. In my personal climbing and skiing, so sort of, I think of big mountain stuff because that's kind of my greatest passion. I've definitely failed or turned around more than 50% of my big mountains. And so those couple of sort of big successes that I'm most proud of, like Everest without oxygen, like being the first person to ski off the 8th tallest mountain in the world from the summit, Manaslu, things like that. They're actually very rare, kind of bright spots in a career of failure. But I think, 8,000 meter peaks are such the fact that it's meant to be that way is just so clear to me from being there so much of the time and from knowing the same is true with, so many other climbers, that I think it's easier in my life to fail a lot and be okay with it than it would be for, some young 20-something up and coming, maybe in 6,000 meter peaks in South America. I think there's a lot more pressure there, and you got to succeed. You might not get another chance. And that's where I think that's where certainly I, as a young athlete, felt a lot more risk. I was willing to push a lot harder. That was a long answer to yes. On personal climbs and skis, definitely I fail more than 50% of the time. On guiding trips, obviously, my job on most of my guiding is to do better than that. And so most of the trips I guide, I've made sure to pre-qualify our clients to make sure they're ready for that trip. And then we mostly guide trips in places we know really intimately and have relatively quote unquote dialed, so that the success ratio can be quite a bit higher. There's still luck involved, but less luck, more knowledge. And then I have this great sort of small group of clients who have become friends over the years who like the adventure of the unknown. And so I try to guide at least one trip every year to a place I've never been to where we're not dialed. And those guys know they're walking into the shit show with me, and we're going to have an adventure, and who knows what the outcome will be.
And you're probably so stoked to do all the logistics for that one too, because you're I've never done this before.
It's awesome. I just got to go down the rabbit hole reading on the internet about the new place and try to find all the details. Yeah, it's super fun.
And so then, obviously you're an athlete in addition to being an entrepreneur. But so when did you start to get, I guess, noticed as an athlete as well as having the business, and how do those two things blend and work together?
Do you think that you as the climber has helped the growth of the business, or has the business helped you grow as a climber?
Ooh, so meta.
That'd be such a good question for my business partners, Aaron and Logan. Has my personal climbing career helped or hurt Alpenglow Expeditions? Because, of course, there's ways it's helped, because some of the media and publicity I've been lucky enough to have on my personal climbs and skis kind of carries over into the business. So certainly the business is better known because of that exposure. But at the same time, it means that I spend a huge amount of my time at home training, and then I go away for months at a time on trips that aren't necessarily making money for Alpenglow Expeditions. And so there's a downside. I mean, obviously, I think my business partners sometimes feel like if I actually sat at a desk 12 months a year, the business would move forward faster with that leadership year round instead of just 5 months a year. But I don't think anyone would trade the balance I have. I certainly wouldn't. I love the balance. What was the second part of your question?
I like that answer. I think.
No, both questions were pretty intertwined, and I think you hit it there. But so in regards to balance, though, that you brought up, you're away. The leader of the company is really full on 5 months of the year. Otherwise, you're away. How does that impact the other parts of your life too? Like when you are away on whether it's guiding for Alpenglow or it's a personal expedition, you're only at a business for less than half, 50% of the year. Yeah. And also you have a relationship and family. Yeah. Right. So like, how are you maintaining all of that?
A lot of coffee.
By the skin of my teeth. Maybe not very well some of the time. But technology is making this easier, clearly. So 20 years ago, when I started traveling internationally, I would go away for 2 months at a time, and I would send my family a postcard and hope it got there before I got home. And then 8 to 10 years ago, I was, spending $10,000 a year on a satellite phone bill, trying to keep things running in my company, and trying to keep relationships together while traveling internationally and still living in a 8 months a year. And today it truly is so much easier and cheaper, at least to communicate. So there's almost nowhere I go now where I don't have WhatsApp pretty much all the time on my phone through satellite, and it's super affordable. And that means like the biggest change I've seen, like especially in my personal life, but in the business as well, is like because it's cheap and so easy, and it's not like you're making this really important phone call and you have 7 minutes before the satellite's going to drop you, or it's $8 a minute to be on that satellite phone. Now that it's cheap and easy and it's right there, it means you can hear sort of the minutia of each day, like the not important stuff that no one used to tell me on a phone call, or that I would never tell someone on a phone call. And the difference is that now when I come home, I still feel like I know what was going on in my business partner's life, and in Emily's life, and in my dad's life, and in my sister's life, because we were talking about the stupid stuff like getting a flat tire or whatever it is. And so it's really changed my sort of like reintegration back into home. It makes it easier and faster and more comfortable. So that's been a really big change. And then, you probably know or have read about, I really focus now both my personal trips and my business trips on what we call rapid ascent. So we've been shortening trips to the big mountains anywhere from 30% to 50% trip length by everything from pre-acclimatizing at home in hypoxic tents to really good weather forecasting to really good logistics to taking a little bit more risk in some ways, like risk of failure. And that's allowed us to really shorten the trips. So I'm rarely away for more than a month now. And there is a difference there. I used to leave for 2.5 months at a time to go to like Everest. And now I leave for no more than 30 days. And it's still a long time, but you don't lose everything in that time. You don't have to restart relationships in that time.
Yeah, that's powerful. Regarding the importance of acclimatization, I'd love to have you kind of expand on the hypoxic tent concept and so just to backtrack a little bit, you kind of hit the nail on the head saying the early 20-year-old in South America, right? So that was like me on Aconcagua when I was 23 and had no business being there. And but like me and my friends were overconfident, and we went and we did it like without guides, without porters, and we got to 21,000 feet and we were trying to rush the top to beat a snowstorm, and I didn't acclimatize well enough, and I started to feel like early symptoms of high altitude pulmonary edema, and so I ended up having to turn around after a trip that I had planned for almost 2 years. And that killed me, but I knew that the mountain wasn't going anywhere, and I knew that I should have acclimatized better. So so I'd
good decision.
Yeah, right.
Even as a 23-year-old.
I know it was, and that was one of those things that I look back and I was like, man, could I have done it? But it was the right move. With that as a lead-in, I guess I'd love for you to talk more about acclimatization and that plan and how you've shortened that time to listeners who don't necessarily know what that process is like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think acclimatization is the process of your body being able to survive at altitude. Perhaps that is obvious, but the main thing that needs to happen is your body needs to build new red blood cells. So you have a higher concentration of red blood cells in your bloodstream, and the red blood cells are essentially like the trucks carrying the molecules of oxygen around to your brain and all your essential organs and your muscles. And the challenge is that there is no legal fast way to build red blood cells. It takes, at a minimum, when your body is stimulated by higher altitude, that it sort of gets a signal that you need more red blood cells to be able to survive. It takes at a minimum 2 weeks, and for many people, 3 weeks or more to start getting a noticeable increase in red blood cells. And so traditionally, what we did is we did that acclimatization, that allowing for building red blood cells on the mountain. And that's what you hear of people talking about, the tradition of climb high and sleep low. So you go to a new altitude up high to where your body is kind of suffering and can't survive. That triggers a chemical response to build new red blood cells. And then you drop back down lower on the mountain to where your body is comfortable so that it has the energy and basically the energy it needs to build those red blood cells. So it's a really slow process, and the higher you go, the slower it gets. And it's in many ways really boring. Like if you love playing cards and drinking whiskey, then spending 2.5 months on Everest, where 6 of those weeks you're actually sitting in base camp, hanging out, it could be a lot of fun if you like summer camp. But like a lot of people, kind of that time feels like wasted time sometimes. And it's different at different points in your life and different trips. But so we started looking for ways to jumpstart that acclimatization process, and Olympic athletes and endurance athletes had started using these hypoxic tents that essentially go over your bed, and there's a generator that sucks oxygen out of the air and replaces it with nitrogen, which doesn't do any harm to the body to have too much nitrogen, and sort of mimics high altitude at home. And what many athletes have found, although, the science is still being worked on in terms of large scale studies, but what a lot of athletes found is that spending at least 8 hours a day, so kind of your sleeping time in these tents, and then doing some really high end workouts at extreme altitudes for 60 to 90 minutes while you're awake, triggers responses in your body to build red blood cells. So all of our trips now, from on 20,000 foot peaks all the way up to the tallest peaks in the world like Everest, all of our members and all of our guides sleep in these tents for anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks and do mask-based exercise training. And it's really effectively cut the initial few weeks off of the trip. So it doesn't change what you do once you get up really high, because the highest these tents can go is about 20,000 feet. So essentially it's making everything faster at the beginning. So we can now go from a client at sea level in New York City can 48 hours later by helicopter be in a base camp at 18,000 feet, and we can be confident they're going to be okay. And then above that, they still, if they need to do more acclimatization, let's say they're not wearing oxygen or they're going to the summit of Aconcagua like you were trying to do at 23,000 feet, then they still need to spend some period of acclimatization on the mountain to get their bodies ready for that altitude above 20,000 feet. But it's a much smaller piece. So our Aconcagua trips are now about 10 days long instead of 21 days long is a good example. Our Everest trips are now 30 to 35 days long instead of 70 days long.
Is that end to end, or is that days climbing?
That's end to end. Yeah, so a 35-day trip is on Everest, for instance, is USA to USA. And this spring, with a group of clients that I've been climbing with quite a bit around the world, and they really wanted to push even harder than that. We sorry, that's my puppy here in the back.
That's all right. It's like a ticking time bomb with my dogs over here. Like I'm just waiting for them to do the same thing.
So this spring, with 3 of my climbing partners, client/climbing partners, we were able to climb both the 6th tallest mountain, Cho-Yu, and Everest, USA to USA in 23 days. Wow, and it shows what's possible with really strong athletes who are willing to suffer and with the right logistics and pre-acclimatization.
Yeah, it's rad. And I also think it makes it a much more approachable adventure for those folks who have 9-to-5s and have, PTO that they don't necessarily have 35 days that they can go. So maybe that Aconcagua trip, I think you mentioned, is 10. Like that's much more approachable for them to be able to go on those trips. And so it's just expanding to a larger audience and not just people who have maybe like more flexible work life. I'm just excited to sign up. So just,
one of the coolest new trips that I'm actually guiding, we've tested it twice on private groups and now we're offering it as a open enrollment trip for the first time this fall. We're running a long weekend trip to climb Cotopaxi in Ecuador. So Cotopaxi is the tallest active volcano in the world, 19,300 feet tall, glaciated above 16,000 feet. But normally no one would, you would need like 10 days, 10 days, like a week plus the weekends on both ends. And even that's a lot for people to take away from family and friends. And now we have this new product where you leave home on a Thursday, you summit on a Saturday, and you're home on a Sunday, and you've slept, you've been like the boy or the girl in the bubble for 4 weeks at home, but then you've only had to go for a long weekend. And I'm just so excited about it too. Offer the opportunity to people who really have that time stress. But I think with that said, it's really important to know, like both for my climbing friends and people who think this might be like, making it easier on people or things like that. Like, we really don't believe it. We don't want people cutting corners. Like, our experience requirements of actual skills that you need on the mountain remain the same. So you still need to dedicate time to gaining skills before you go to Everest, for instance. And it also doesn't, early on when we were selling this, we allowed, I think, a number of our clients to think that hypoxic training could replace physical training, if that makes sense. Like if you're acclimatized, you don't need to work out so much. And they're two completely different things. Acclimatization stands completely separate from fitness and physical ability and mental ability to suffer. And so, I think that's really important to know. It doesn't actually make it easier. It just compresses the timeline.
I think it's also important for anybody who's listening to this and is about to Google like altitude masks or something. Like don't buy the or don't think this is the same thing as the elevation training mask. Like all that's doing is restricting airflow. It's not simulating altitude.
Absolutely right, and I get asked that question all the time. These units are quite a bit more expensive, have quite a bit more science behind them. The one company we work with called Hypoxico, they had something like 600 athletes in the last Olympics utilizing their system in the months leading up to the Olympics. So these are really well tested, widespread use, and completely legal from like groups like the International Olympic Committee or the Tour de France and things like that.
So when is this Cotopaxi trip being rolled out?
It's actually over. The first one is actually over Thanksgiving. So if you have nothing going on over Thanksgiving, let me know. We're actually, interestingly, we're full with a massive waiting list, and
I bet.
We're not sure whether that's because it is this short trip that we're finally offering to the general public, or because it's the group of guides is kind of this all-star group of guides we brought in. I'm doing it. Topo, who's been one of my main climbing partners in the mountains, who summited Everest without oxygen when he was 23 years old. Carla Perez, who was the first South American woman to summit Everest without oxygen 3 years ago. We just have this super fun group. So
that's awesome.
It should be a good time.
Yeah. So speaking of kind of expanding trips, I was looking at your website in preparation for this and for Alpenglow, and just the map is hugely expansive. Like, so what was the process of expanding the footprint to different areas of the world? Obviously, like, the Himalayas were, from what I understand, a big focus in the beginning, but what was the expansion process and trying out new areas like?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. Like, I really didn't want to work in places where I wasn't really confident of our logistics, especially as we started trying to shorten trips. Like, you guys, you and I'm sure a lot of your listeners have traveled so much internationally. And if you're on trips where like your Jeep breaks down 3 times and you get a flat tire and then the driver doesn't show up because he drank too much the night before, and like all these things add days to the trip. And we're trying to be like really dialed. So we really wanted to be places where we had logistical partners that we know and love. And so when I started Alpenglow, that was basically in like 3 countries. And then over time, we expanded to locations, usually one of 2 ways. Either one of my really great clients wanted to go somewhere that we hadn't been before, but they were one of those group who were up for adventure. And so we'd go and do an experimental trip or 2 and kind of figure things out and find a partner that really shared our values. And then we'd slowly expand into that place. Or as my guide team expanded, now I think we're up to 9 sort of lead guides that can run our big international trips anywhere in the world. And that's still a tiny group as compared to a lot of other companies. But, we have 9 people who we know each other so well. We climb together, we play together, things like that. And so as those guides slowly came into the mix, they had places they had been or they had been guiding that they could bring their expertise to the team, and we could add it to Alpenglow.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, you will. I'll definitely be looking at your future trips that aren't full, and we'll be talking.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, it's cool. Like every trip I go on, I still have so much fun and like refreshed by seeing it through people's eyes that haven't been there before. And I truly believe every trip we run is awesome. That doesn't mean we always summit, but every trip is like really cool. So yeah, join us.
Absolutely. Well, dude, so we've been talking all about these worldwide, like global, crazy big expeditions, but you've got something pretty epic happening in your backyard right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. So thanks for the lead in. Alpenglow Expeditions, even though we were founded in 2004, we didn't start guiding in Tahoe until 2016 because it was that hard to get local permits. There was a moratorium on new commercial use of public lands since 1976. And we finally broke through after I'd lived here for 8 years and got our permit. And so we started building a local program. And that now includes a really robust backcountry skiing program, an avalanche education program in the winter, and then in the summer, a lot of rock climbing and backpacking. But for the past couple of years, our sort of dream to expand that and to introduce more people to what we love about human-powered recreation in the mountains, we've been working to build a Via Ferrata in Squaw Valley in Lake Tahoe. And for your listeners who don't know, Via Ferrata, it translates to like Iron Road. And they were originally built in the Alps during World War I and World War II for troops to be able to move through the Alps without needing technical climbing expertise. And the key to the Via Ferrata is essentially you take an exposed area that would normally only rock climbers would be able to go there, and we install a 1/2-inch steel cable the entire way up the climbing route. And then you mix sort of traditional rock climbing techniques, sort of standing on the rock, with sections where it's more difficult, where you might have ladder rungs or little steel steps built out of the rock, or even like cable bridges across gaps. And they are so much fun. And what they mean is hikers with no climbing experience can actually access these sort of exposed places. And the tram face that we built our Via Ferrata on here in Squaw is this incredible 1,000-foot granite rock face that towers above the town of the tiny village of Squaw. And it's always been off limits. It's sort of illegal to climb or ski up there. The rock is too low quality for traditional rock climbing, but that's part of what makes it great for Via Ferrata is you're not competing with rock climbers for space on the face. And after 2 years of environmental reviews and permitting and just unimaginable hoops to jump through with the county, and then finally building, we're opening this weekend.
Oh my gosh. That's exciting.
It sounds amazing. So for the non-climbers who are going to take this on, I mean, how many weeks do they have to spend in a hypoxic tent?
That's the beauty. No hypoxic tent. You show up in Squaw Valley at our office, Alpenglow Expeditions, in your flip-flops and board shorts from the lake. And thanks to our amazing sponsors, we have, an approach shoe rental program and a backpack rental program, and even, puffy jackets from Eddie Bauer. And we outfit people, and then they meet their guide, and they're 3.5-ish hour experiences, which include, getting to the base of the face, learning the basic technique of using a Via Ferrata lanyard system. That's what actually connects you to the steel cable, and then guided through the climb, and then a half-hour hike off the back and back down to where you started. And so the whole thing really is accessible to kids, families, as long as you enjoy hiking or, a workout that's a couple of hours long. I really believe you can love this Via Ferrata and at the same time really push yourself, because there is exposure. There are places where you really feel the air under your feet, and you're looking out at Lake Tahoe, thousands of feet below you. And it's pretty different. It's hard to explain until you get up there.
And launching this weekend. That's so exciting. I can't wait to get back out to Squaw.
Yeah.
Yeah. So between our team trying to summit Cho-Yu tonight, and then Via Ferrata launching this weekend, none of the home office team is getting any sleep this week, but it really feels like an exciting time.
So the team trying to summit Cho-Yu tonight, that includes Caroline Glick, right?
That's right. So Caroline Glick has been a friend, and I've sort of watched her career as a pro skier and skiing, sort of big exposed lines, both in the United States and then slowly down in South America. And during that time, she was, occasionally asking for advice, and I hope I was able to help as she went to places like Ecuador and Peru and Mexico, where I've done quite a bit of skiing and guiding in the past. And when she finally decided that it was time to go to an 8,000 meter peak, she was interested in combining sort of her skills and experience with the logistics and experience of Alpenglow's guide team. And this is one of my favorite things that I think we as a company, Alpenglow, get to do that a lot of the bigger companies don't. Some of our competitors, we're small enough that we can be flexible and take on unique projects that don't exactly fit the mold of a normal Cho-Yu climber or something like that. And so we get to work with people like, Hillary O'Neill and Jim Morrison when they're going to climb and see big things. And we were just on a project in South America with Sherpa Cinemas, doing a bunch of filming of skiers down there. And now we get to have Caroline Glick, who's trying to ski her first 8,000 meter peak, but also we're getting to be a part of that and sort of lending our expertise. And yeah, she had sort of the classic first 8,000 meter peak trip, and I'm sure she'll tell her story more where she got when she gets home. But she was so strong and fit, and then she got sick, and it happens, and she had to fight through all the uncertainty and disappointment and kind of suffering of being really truly sick on the mountain, and then the patience it takes to be behind actually some of the other people on the team, and then come back to where she's now, super strong and going for the summit. And I've just loved watching that process, because I know how hard it is for ego and sanity and all of it, and yet she's done everything right, and now she, I really hope she and the whole team will be successful tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been watching and cheering along her progress. So Caroline was actually a guest on the Stoke cast for episode 5, and it was on that show that she first, it was the first time that she said she was doing that trip. She had to kind of swallow her nerves and just say to herself, okay, I'm going to go do an 8,000 meter peak. And so then after that show, we've just been seeing her training with the hypoxic tents and everything that she had been doing. And it's been so cool to see her progress now. So we're really hoping she gets it tonight.
Yes, me too. Stay tuned. You'll have to have her back on.
Definitely, yeah. We'll have to do a follow-up. But so I guess to continue the tradition of first announcements on the Stoke cast, I think you have one.
Yeah. So hopefully Emily is listening to this. No, she knows already.
Not me.
Not this Emily.
Not
Emily,
me. Yeah.
Emily Harrington, my girlfriend, who's also a pro climber, and she's actually in Sardinia on a big climb right now. She just left last week for a couple of months. But I've made the decision after, I took basically a year off personal projects last year. I didn't climb anything really big for myself last year in 2018 after succeeding on Everest in 2017 without oxygen. And I decided that next year, I've never been to Pakistan, and it's finally time to go see what the Karakoram is all about. And so along with my friends Topo and Kala, I'm going to go and try to climb K2 without supplemental oxygen next summer.
So cool. Oh my
Pretty
God.
That's
cool, but
I need to pay.
yikes.
yeah. Everybody,
It's one of those funny things where I've just slowly been, I've been thinking about it for probably 6 months now, and it takes me that long. And there's a few reasons for that. One, it's like getting the support of my business partners, like we've been talking about, for a big personal trip. Two, it's figuring out if, Emily and I, if it makes sense for me to take that big chunk of time away. And three, risk is something I think a lot about now. And I found on Everest, I felt like the risk without supplemental oxygen above basically 28,000 feet, like the risk felt very, very real to me. And I'm pretty conscious today of how often I'm willing to take that risk and really wanting to know clearly why it feels worth it. And K2 finally now, a mountain that I've sort of avoided for the last decade of my career, it finally feels worth it. It feels like the right people and the right time. And I've got 8 months or 9 months to train really hard to get ready. I train with Uphill Athlete, and I'll be working with them again to try to get as strong as I possibly can. And I'm so fired up for it.
Now, for anybody who doesn't know K2, why have you avoided it for much of your career?
So K2 is interesting, right? It's the second tallest mountain in the world. It's a few hundred feet lower than Everest. And that few hundred feet does make it easier. There are a number of people who have summited all 13 8,000 meter peaks without oxygen, except for Everest. And that extra 1,000 feet does make a big difference. But K2 has a fearsome reputation because it's a steeper line, and it has a lot more exposure to rockfall, icefall, and avalanches. And those are the things that are really hard to control on a mountain. And so what that means is really safety is based on being fast. And when you're climbing without supplemental oxygen, you are by definition not fast. So you have to really weigh that, how many hours you're willing to be in those really dangerous zones, and why it's worth it, and how you're going to move as fast as you possibly can.
Well, we will be watching your training and watching you hopefully be successful.
Yeah,
there.
when are you going for it? When is that?
So I'll be on Everest again next spring, supporting a project for Corey, my main climbing partner from the last couple of years. So I'll get to be support on Everest, as well as expedition leading my main Alpenglow team. But I'll be sucking all the oxygen I can to try to stay strong and fit, and still training while I'm there. And then I'll head to K2 around the end of June, with the hopes to summit, if I get incredibly lucky, towards the end of July.
That's awesome. That is
so
really
epic, man. I can't wait to watch along. Well,
thanks so much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it sounds like you're probably blowing up with all updates from the whole team, climbing and everything. But one last question that we do ask every guest, and that's just, what does Stoke mean to you?
Gosh, that's a good one. So Stoke to me is this energy that we can feel and that I thrive on when I'm doing things that are hard for me, where the outcome is unknown, with people I care about and trust. Like I think some people can, but for me, I never feel that like full feeling of Stoke if I'm not sharing it with someone else, a partner, a client, a loved one. So that's what it is to me.
awesome.
That's beautiful.
Great.
Share the Stoke.
Yeah. There it is.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, where can people catch up with you or follow you or connect? You know, where do you want them to go? Whether it's Instagram or Snapchat or website? Yeah,
the easiest place is Adrian Ballinger is my handle on Instagram. And then I'd love it if your listeners want to check out Alpenglow Expeditions to hopefully be able to get out on an adventure together sometime and share some of that Stoke. And the business guiding website is alpenglowexpeditions.com.
Awesome. And we'll have that in the show notes for sure as well.
Great.
Thanks so much,
Thanks so
Adrian.
much for the great question.
Yeah.
No, it's been awesome to talk to you and hear about all of your adventures, the ones that we know about, and the background stories of everything that's led up to what we see in the media.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you guys. It's been a fun show.
All right, guys, there you have it. To follow Adrian, go to @Adrian Ballinger on social. Also, his Via Ferrata project, it's @Tahoe Via. So go check that out too to see what's going on in Alpenglow's world in the Tahoe region. If you happen to be visiting California, especially the Lake Tahoe area, it's an awesome place to go, and that seems like it would be super fun.
Yeah, I actually was just looking at a picture of this today, and it opened earlier this week, like the 1st of October, I believe. So that's really rad. That's what I'm talking about with the innovation thing. I'm like, who would have looked at that face of rock and been like, you know what? I feel like a Via Ferrata should go up there. I feel like that's what should happen. Like, super creative mind, this guy. So I really love that he was really creative, really innovative. Seems like a really personable guy, and I obviously love that he loves logistics as much as me. I was stoked on that.
You're a logistics nerd, aren't you?
Such a nerd. Oh my gosh. I literally just scheduled a trip with my sister. We never travel together, and it's like our first sister travel thing in a while, and we're just going to Savannah for the weekend just for fun. And
Georgia.
Yeah, random, but
All right.
It's supposed to be awesome.
Savannah
I've never been there.
Awesome.
So obviously, like, the immediate moment she was like, okay, let's go to Savannah, I was like, okay, here's the flights that we need. These are the different booking options for Airbnb or hotel or bed and breakfast and bread. Yeah. And literally today, like, I already have a list of all the recommendations of places that we're going. Like, I have everything, like, planned in my head. She doesn't know that yet, but.
Savannah's so cool. So one little tip for there. I don't know if you wear heels, but if you do, don't to Savannah.
Jonathan, do you? Oh my God, that makes me feel like you don't know me at all. When have you seen me?
I don't ever see you, like, get super dressed up. I wasn't sure if you were, like, with your sister going out for a girls' night.
Although
right?
the last time you did see me, I was in boot heels. So that okay,
so,
all right. But
all
normally I'm in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and that's my usual outfit.
I know, I get that, but that was not an off-base question. I'm
still a woman. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so I have to tread lightly.
Yes.
So don't wear heels in Savannah because, like,
tip.
major uneven cobblestones.
That is a great tip. So I'll wear my
cool spot.
My Skechers.
So have you been sleeping in a hypoxic tent to get ready for Savannah?
Yeah, I'm like, you know what? Well, can they go below sea level? So you're like, I wonder what that would be like. You're just like joking.
You're sleeping in a fish tank. You're sleeping underwater to get ready for Georgia?
I haven't been sleeping in that tent.
No.
I don't really have it, like we've talked about, I don't have a desire to, but I'm psyched for you to do that.
I can't wait.
Your wife is going to freaking hate that.
I've showed her pictures of it, and so there's the ones that canopy over your whole bed.
Yeah.
And she's not that into it, because, like, when Alex came to visit me when I was living in Aspen.
Alex is his wife.
Yep. And when she also went to Breckenridge with me for New Year's, and when we were out in Sun Valley and a couple other places, like, we've gone to some places with high altitude. And she always gets sick. Always. She does not do well with altitude. So when I told her that we were going to be sleeping in an Everest tent, she wasn't that psyched. Luckily, they have a couple options. One is, like, just a mask, like a gas mask kind of dealie.
You're gonna look like Darth Vader.
Well, the other one is like a personal pillow chamber. Like, it goes around your head like a square astronaut helmet, right? So that's I think the happy medium of what I might be sleeping in.
That's kind of how I envision like people like Mark Zuckerberg like sleep in like some sort of chamber like that, because I think they're kind of aliens. So you could do the same thing.
Well, you remember that like Disney show, like Alan Strange? He was some like alien that slept in a pod in some kid's closet.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, that's what it makes me think of.
Yeah, so have fun with that chamber that you're sleeping in.
I'm so psyched on it.
We'll let Adrian know how you like it.
Well, that it makes such a huge difference, acclimatization, because I did talk a little bit about my experience on Aconcagua.
Yeah.
And how, like, the two guys I was with, Ethan and Ryan, they were still living in Aspen at the time when we left for South America.
Which is at
7,900 feet.
So that's a good step up from sea level.
So I had moved back to Boston at the early October. So I was back for a couple months before leaving for that trip. And so they were more acclimatized going into it.
Yeah.
And when we're trying to go for the summit on day 9 to try and beat a storm because we were at high camp without all the supplies that were at base camp, and our decision was like, do we go all the way back down to Plaza de Mulas to get like all the food and everything we need and delay our whole push and go backtrack, or do we try and beat the storm? They were already ready to try and beat the storm.
Yeah.
And though I felt fine to that point in the mountain, obviously on summit day, after a few hours, around 21,600 feet, I was dropping to my knees with like, heart palpitations, my chest feeling like it was collapsing. I was like going tunnel vision, like I couldn't form sentences. It was terrifying.
Yeah, that's
and
scary.
Something like pre-acclimatization, like the hypoxic tents, as silly as sleeping in that tent or the pillow chamber sounds, I'm so into it because I've had that really life-threatening, scary experience.
And it speeds up the process for you too.
100%.
Like you don't have to spend as much time there. Like he was talking about those rapid ascents that he does.
Yeah. So they, like for Aconcagua, again, it's the tallest mountain in South America. They give you a permit for 21 days on the mountain if that's what you want to go and like take that time. And most people do. They try and go for the summit on day 17 or 18 and get off the mountain within 22 so that they have enough time to acclimatize. So the thought of being able to go and do that in a week is incredible. Or do Cotopaxi in a weekend, that's mind-blowing. So I'm so sold on this approach.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be following up. Adrian, if you're listening to this, I'm hitting you up ASAP.
Well, there you have it. I mean, that's all you need. He got one new client out of this at least, so that's good.
Yeah.
So like we said, follow along with Adrian. He's awesome. And guys, keep listening to the Stokecast. We're loving all the feedback we're getting. Thanks so much for writing reviews, just sending us notes, or whatever way you're doing it. We really appreciate it. And please share with your friends if they are someone who's interested in the outdoors or maybe interested in starting a new business or whatever they're interested in. Doesn't matter. We have a very large variety here at the Stokecast headquarters. So continue to listen and please subscribe.
Right? Yeah. And no, those reviews, they really mean a lot. I mean, we read every single one. And actually, this one I have to call out because I just thought it was so cool.
Okay.
So Maya7789, if you're listening. I imagine that's, I don't know, I could be off base here, but that might be a July 7th, 89 birthday.
Oh, wow. You're very creative.
Cracking the code. But Maya says, I binge listened to this on a tough day on the PCT. It was interesting, fun, and inspiring, and helped me dig deep and hike some big miles. I appreciate that the content covers many disciplines and is applicable to listeners on any skill level. And I kind of was like, took a step back after reading that and was like, that is so cool that like you're just Maya's out there on the PCT and just like trucking along. And we talked to Joe a few episodes back who did the PCT and the ACT, and the AT.
That's a test.
You're right, it is. The AT. And we know what kind of like journey of solitude that can be, and how having the right thing to listen to is so impactful. And for her to take the time on that journey to say that she loved our episodes was very meanful. So
thanks,
thank you, Maya, and thank you to anybody else who's listening to this to get to work or get to Mount Katahdin or the Muir Wilderness or whatever it is.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, guys. Please keep sharing the Stoke.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Emily Holland.
And I'm Jonathan Ronzio. We'll catch you next week with another episode of the Stokecast.